French Parliament expected to rubber stamp what's been called Operation Sangaris, the deployment of French troops to the Central African Republic. There are strings attached, though. Debate was heated over the price tag and the number of troops required. Another issue, the chances of success, what with foreign troops failing to prevent the mass exodus of Muslim shopkeepers accused of siding with northern rebels who took the capital last April and now chased out by the tens of thousands. Our coverage of this story begins in the capital of Centrafrique, and France 24's Chris Moore. Chris, unlike in Mali, where chasing out jihadists turned out to be fairly straightforward, what is the mission in Centrafrique?
To Mali, the French were deployed as the first part of the deployment of international forces, effectively to stand between, to act as a policeman between the two sides in what was becoming an increasingly intercommunal conflict. Back last year, we had the Seleka rebels, who are primarily Muslim, taking power. That was when Michel Djotodia came to be president. He's no longer president now. There's a transitional authority in place. The new president, Catherine Sambou-Panza. The role of the French, however, in terms of its definition, remains very similar. It's to try and keep the country from descending into communal violence. If you look at what they're doing out on the streets of the capital, Bangui, it's a case of fairly regular patrols in fairly heavily armoured vehicles. A lot of manning checkpoints. Now, residents here are aware that the French and their African Union colleagues can establish control in parts of the city along the main transport axes. That's where you see some kind of life getting back to some kind of normality here in the Central African capital, but away from those major axes, away from those major checkpoints. A lot of people here are still very scared.
And there still is, as we've been hearing with the latest numbers of people going to neighboring countries, there still is an exodus going on. How many troops are there now? How much of a foreign presence have you witnessed? And really, what's needed, Chris?
In terms of the French presence, it's about 1,600. There are about 6,000 African forces. In terms of what's needed, well, that's anybody's guess, really. As I said, the French troops are capable of keeping something of a lid on the situation in the capital of the Central African Republic. Bangui is a huge country. The number of soldiers on the ground is very small compared to the size of the country. Very little is known about what's going on in the more far-flung parts of the country. It's not just a question of keeping the peace on the ground, of course. There is now a kind of political process in place in terms of getting the country back up and running towards elections, which are scheduled for next year. And part of the role for French soldiers and international soldiers going forward is really going to be to try to aid that political process to disarm, for example, the anti-Balaka Christian militia, any remaining Seleka rebels, and at the same time open up supply routes into a country which economically has been pretty much brought to its knees. A lot of the roads, for example, are very insecure. There's one big supply route which leads into Cameroon, which is still the subject of armed gangs and roadblocks, and the humanitarian situation for people in Bangui living both in refugee camps or just buying food at poorly stocked markets is very difficult.
All right, let's go now to the National Assembly. We're waiting on the vote. The Prime Minister, a short while ago, promising lawmakers there would be a swift handover early next month to UN mandate. Let's go to the National Assembly. Our own Rochelle Ferguson is there. Rochelle, as we said at the top, the French Parliament expected to rubber stamp, but what is the general mood among the lawmakers you've been speaking to?
It's quite a divided mood, Francois. The debate is fully in swing here. Of course, no vote has taken place. That's expected in over an hour's time. But the Prime Minister, Jean-Marc Ayrault, he started with a couple of quite emotive questions. Should we allow the atrocities to continue in the Central African Republic? And equally, should we just leave them in their time of need? Now, he went on to talk about the issues in Bangui, as we were just hearing, saying that, look, the violence is no longer limited to just a couple of neighbourhoods. It's spreading. He went on to give figures of 250,000 refugees, not to mention 800,000 people displaced. So for Jean-Marc Ayrault, the message is clear. We shouldn't abandon Central African Republic in its time of need, and the mission absolutely needs prolonging as far as he's concerned.
Mission needs to be prolonged, but public opinion, even though it's on the rise, it's still below 50%. The latest poll said 42% in favor of this intervention? You get a sense when you speak to some of the lawmakers there, there's a bit of fatigue after the mission in Mali?
Absolutely. There is fatigue. Speaking to some lawmakers, the questions that they had were about the budget. Can France afford to implicate itself so fully in yet another conflict which isn't on French soil? It's going to be costly, is the message coming from some of the lawmakers who oppose the potential decision here. Equally, one of the lawmakers made a comment that said that the state of the Central African Republic needs to be rebuilt from A to Z, and said that France has neither the means or the resources or indeed the time to invest in such a lengthy operation.
A bit of a tricky one there, especially since France is the former colonial power and it's intervened before in the Central African Republic.
It has intervened before. It has, and the question being asked now is how long is this intervention going to take? People here asking for a clear guideline. Don't forget the Defence Minister, Jean-Yves Le Drian, initially said, well, this will take 4 to 6 months. When he arrived in Bangui, he changed his mind and said, actually, this will probably take double that time. So there is a little bit of frustration from some people here saying, look, actually, we need a firmer objective in terms of what the French military is going to be doing on the ground. Will they be disarming rebels? Will they be there maintaining peace until elections, a deadline for which has been set for March the 15th? What exactly will their mandate be there? So those are some of the questions being raised here currently.
All right, Rochelle Ferguson, many thanks. And again, a short while ago, the French Prime Minister was addressing the National Assembly, where Rochelle has been reporting, Jean-Marc Ayrault, saying that that vote before the UN Security Council will come early in March, and saying that the French have made a big difference.
Elections must be organised before February 2015, and important steps have already been taken. The electoral code has been adopted, and the electoral authority is now in place. The international community needs to do all it can to respect this timetable.
All right, where you are, Chris Moore, do elections seem like a realistic venture when we're talking about religious and ethnic cleansing?
Right now, the prospects for elections seems very distant. Even getting the most basic services up and running again here in Bangui is proving quite a big challenge. Supply is a big problem just in terms of basic goods coming into the city. If for those people not living in refugee camps, life is quite simply getting more expensive. We're talking about ethnic cleansing. There's a term which has been bandied around by the likes of Amnesty International and other humanitarian organizations recently. In terms of the intercommunal conflict, the fact of the matter on the ground is that here in Bangui, the vast majority of the city's Muslims have now left the city. If you go into the few enclaves in which they remain, they're heavily protected, usually by African forces. There are very few of them left, and they're waiting really by the roadside to be assured safe passage out by the United Nations. In terms of the fighting between the two communities in the streets, that should logically tail off. There are, of course, a lot of heavily armed people still in the Central African Republic, which is just one of the challenges facing the new government before it moves into this political process. So whether there be more French troops, more international troops, there's still a lot of work to be done here. And that's a message which has been put out by the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, saying we need more soldiers here, one of which the country's interim president, Catherine Samba-Panza, is more than aware herself, saying that we need to up the international presence here in terms of the numbers that are actually needed. It's very difficult to put a figure on it, but more than a here now.
All right, Chris Moore, I want to thank you. Apologies for the quality of the line to Bangui. Our correspondent there caught in a storm in the last couple of minutes there. Chris Moore, who'll be reporting more later on after that vote, which is expected, as our correspondent Rochelle Ferguson was saying, in the coming hour at the French National Assembly. Stay with us. Much more to come here on France 24. We'll have all the day's business plus sports all coming up.